Welcome everybody to our webinar from Crush Life Sciences. We're going to hold off for about a couple minutes so that people come in. I think we had over 200 registrations, so it takes a little while for everybody to dial up. So give us a couple minutes. At the bottom of your screen, if you're waiting, there is a button that says poll, and there's just 3 quick questions we'd like to have you guys respond to, if you can. And we'd love to maybe we can announce that poll sometime in the middle of the presentation today. Looks like we have 66 participants coming in quickly. For those of you that have just joined us, we'll be starting in a minute or two. If you have a chance, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says poll. We'd love to have you answer those 3 questions, and we will announce the results of that during this webinar. Thank you. Okay, it looks like the number of participants coming in has slowed down. Let's get this show on the road. So welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Doug McDougall, co-founder of Crush Life Sciences, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to Private Equity in the Pandemic, how early stage CEOs are raising capital from their living rooms. Over the next 50 minutes, we'll discuss the current landscape and share some stories of fundraising in this challenging environment. We'll also share with you some best practices, or we will all share with you some best practices for fundraising during COVID-19 and beyond. We have a great panel of experts to speak to this today. We have Corey Goodman, managing partner at VenBio, and he's been very active in deploying capital during this COVID-19 period. We have Caroline Lowe, who's president and CEO of Glimpse Bio, and just recently raised an oversubscribed $46 million Series B for her nanoparticle-based biosensors for NASH. And also joining us is Neil Higgins, who's managing partner for capital markets at Locust Walk, who actually completed a transaction, a very large transaction, in June for one of his clients. Before we jump in, a brief about me and about Crush Life Sciences. For those of you that don't know Crush, it was founded by myself, and I'm a long-term communications consultant in the industry. Lori Halloran, who leads a life science regulatory quality and clinical consulting firm, and Jeff Myerson, head of the global life science transaction firm. We saw a need for an organization dedicated to providing inspirational, practical, educational content to current and future life science executives to enhance leadership skills in our industry. Our conferences, the board meeting, the leadership meeting, the finance meeting, and what was the other one, the deal meeting, were all been held for about 2 years, and we're very high content, quality education for executives. We hope to get back to that at some point in time, but in the meantime, we've got these virtual meetings that we're going to be free to be able to help provide content to people. So if you would like to get involved more with Crush, whether you want to be speakers or have ideas for topics, or just want to be notified about the upcoming programs and stuff, please go to crushlifesciences.com, or you can reach out to me or any member of the team. In real life, I'm co-founder and managing partner at McDougall Advisors, a strategic business and communications consultancy that's provided creative services, public relations, and investor relations support to the industry for over 18 years. I've been in this industry for 32 years, starting off as a naive CFO of a public biotech company in 1988. And boy, has this industry changed and grown. And I'm sure Corey has seen that as well, and all of you people. I've also seen firsthand the incredible amount of dollars that have flown into the industry in the recent months. According to PitchBook, the venture capital angels and private equity have put in $6.4 billion into the industry in just 2Q of 2020. I think that beats like the 3 years of 14, 15, and 16 total in this industry. It's the most in one quarter ever. And the size of the rounds is only getting bigger. The average fundraise in June was $90 million. So there's a lot of capital being deployed in this industry right now. And we'll talk a little bit about what people think about why it's like it is now, and make just some predictions about the future on this too. We want to make this a very interactive session, so feel free to submit questions at any time during this through the chat or the Q&A. And so with that said, I'd like to jump right in. Corey, Caroline, and Neil, turning to you now, could you please introduce yourself? Corey, do you want to just get started?
Sure, good morning. Actually, I was just looking at the participants and I see a number of people I know, so I won't call them out individually, but nice to see them all. So quick word about my background. I was an academic for years. I was a professor at Stanford and then a professor at Berkeley, a neuroscientist, built the neuroscience program at Berkeley, Neuroscience Institute. Was involved in starting a number of companies back in my early days. Exelixis was the first one I co-founded with a great group. The second one was Renovus. I went in to be CEO of that. I took a leave of absence, took that public, sold it to a larger company, went inside Pfizer for a couple of years on the executive team in charge of biologics, stayed there for a few years, came back out, started a few more companies, and I got tired of pitching those goddamn venture capitalists. So I thought the way to deal with that was to become one of them so that I would control the purse strings. And we started VenBio back in 2010. We just raised our third fund, 394 million. We closed that in March, actually at the end of March, pandemic already going on. And I'm managing partner of VenBio.
Thank you.
And by the way, while we're talking about virtual, what you see on my screen is actually the view from my window. I normally live in San Francisco during the week, and we have an office in Mission Bay, and we've been doing everything by Zoom, and that's the view from my ranch window that I look at every day as we do the deals we're going to talk about. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Caroline, you're on mute.
Great. So thanks, Doug. It's a great pleasure to be here today. So I'm Caroline Lowe, CEO of Glimpse. We're a Series B funded medtech company, and we have a tunable, non-invasive synthetic biomarker technology, and that's something that can have very broad patient and disease impact. And what's kind of our unique proposition is that we can both detect disease as well as monitor disease progression, and that has a very significant value both in the kind of drug development arena as well as in therapeutic deployments. My background is that I have over a 20+ year career in the pharmaceutical industry, predominantly in drug R&D. That included successfully leading the development of a drug that came to market. I built and led a market access organization in a large pharma company, led a $7.5 billion commercial business unit. And most recently, prior to joining Glimpse, I was at Bristol Myers Squibb, where I had responsibility for portfolio strategy and operations for the entire R&D portfolio there. So delighted to be here today and to share a little bit about Glimpse's experience in recent capital raise.
Great. Well,
Neil, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And it's great to be here with Caroline and Corey. I'm Neil Higgins. I'm a managing director in the capital markets team here at Locust Walk in Boston. This is sort of my view from my office here at 200 Clarendon. I might be the only one in the building, which makes it my home office away from home. But I'm really happy to be here. I'm part of a capital markets team that's fairly new here at Locust Walk, probably just over a year and a half. I've been here just over a year, but we've got 6 members of our team now. Prior to Locust Walk, I was at Jefferies for 12 years, Piper Jaffray before that, and Bank of America, and I was a corporate attorney before that, but probably 20 years of helping companies, both public and private companies, raise capital, and came to Locust Walk because I saw the opportunity to work with earlier stage biotech companies. I'd really developed a passion for life sciences in my time on the investment banking side, but saw there was a real need for helping companies earlier in their stage of development raise capital. And that's what we do here at Locust Walk. Everything from raising capital at Series A through crossover pipes and IPO advisory as well. We are not underwriters currently, so that's really where it ends. But that the whole realm of capital needs along the way is what we try to partner with companies to help them achieve those goals. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to this.
Great. So let's get started. And looks like I've actually got a question here, but good. We'll save that for the end because we'll get started. I'd like to start off actually with Caroline. You know, you have went through the mill over the last 4 or 5 months raising your round. You successfully raised it. I understand it was oversubscribed. But love to hear the story about you know, how the pandemic has hit you and how it might have changed your syndicate and your perspective.
Yeah, thanks. So you're right. So we recently closed our Series B round, and it was, as you said, oversubscribed. But we, you know, we had actually started fundraising pre-pandemic, and we closed during the pandemic. But we actually, you know, we signed our term sheet the day the market bottomed out. And, you know, I can share some, you know, kind of firsthand experiences about essentially this, you know, the fundraising experience in what was a time of pretty high volatility and uncertainty. And maybe just first of all, to kind of synthesize that, the three things that stood out for me if I was to look back at it. And some of these things I think apply to any fundraising experience, but some are maybe important take-homes. The first is about, you know, being really focused, right? Really focused in a laser-like manner on kind of, you know, what you're trying to achieve, where you're going to, and what's important and what's not important, and really separating kind of the wheat from the chaff. And that applies to, you know, every aspect of the process. The second piece was about agility, and this was very important. It was about adapting to the environment and the circumstances. And there was sort of this day to night switch, if you want to think about it like that, where we went from, you know, in-person fundraising to, you know, first of all, raising virtually, to second of all, a set of investors who in many cases had very, very changed circumstances. They were focusing on, first of all, the sort of their internal portfolio companies. Second of all, their capital situations. We had investors who had significant capital markets exposure, and their ability to invest in us changed very significantly with that shift. And we had to change our perception of their ability to invest in us. And then as a consequence, our syndicate changed. So there was that sort of shift. And we had to think differently about how we presented our business as well, because I think while you know, it's appropriate to be optimistic about your business, we had to be rational about what was likely to happen going forward. We knew as much about that circumstance as anyone else, but we had to be rational. And I think a lot of what enabled us to complete our round quickly, but also to complete it with the sort of the oversubscription that we did, was that we were highly rational about that. We very quickly adjusted our business plan, our projections, and we were very clear with our investors about what we thought was the adjusted opportunity for our business. And I think that clear-headedness and our agility in changing that viewpoint very early on, in fact, in February, we were starting to make that adjustment because we thought the pandemic was going to impact us. So we were adjusting kind of ahead of that curve. I think was critical to our success. And then the third piece was about maintaining confidence. And I think in any fundraising, you have to be confident, but we had to be confident about our business, right? And of course, we were, managing through the pandemic itself, so we had to maintain our business, but we had to be confident about our business. We had to maintain the confidence of our team and to keep everyone together. But of course, there were other people around us who we had to kind of keep together and to maintain their confidence. And I mean, just to be candid, there were definitely moments where the ground was very uncertain. And I just ask you to cast your mind back to what it was like in March. And in March, we were kind of at the period of signing our term sheet. and it was highly volatile. And I think there was a lot of skittishness, and people really didn't know what was happening. And so I think, you know, the job of the CEO is to maintain that confidence, to be rational, and to make sure that we kind of stay the course and keep everyone with you, right? And that's a critical piece. And so for me, those were kind of the three key things. And they enabled us to still sign the terms, you know, to get a term sheet signed, to rebuild our syndicate. We had some people in our syndicate who maintained, some who had significant market exposure, who were unable to stay with us, and so we had to rebuild part of our syndicate. We were able to do that very clearly, and these were with de novo investors. These were not people who had invested with us previously. They were not people we had met with before. We were able to go out and with a revised view of our business to bring those people in a very short amount of time. And I think it's about having those three things: the focus, the agility, and being confident about what your business is and your potential to execute moving forward. So that's sort of our story. I'm pleased to dig into that a little bit more, but you know, it had a great outcome for us. And you know, I'm pleased to say now we're executing, you know, the business is executing very well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caroline. Yeah, that's something that struck me when we were talking earlier, was just how having investors that both have private and public equity positions can really get hammered and damaged in these volatile markets. And you know, hopefully they've made back all their money, but who knows what's coming down the pike these days. So Neil, you did a transaction in the middle of it. I think you had 20 investors come in. It was started after COVID or just before COVID? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, actually, Doug, we closed a Series A round in late February. So as things were just starting to get a little bit shaky. And the good news there is we had the investors lined up. They were committed to the deal. There were a couple things around the deal that were very specific to the deal that weren't related to COVID, but we sort of were able to get that closed without you know, the market falling apart. And that was, to Caroline's point, really laser focus on and the agility around some of the things that happened right near the end of that deal to get that closed. The deal that you're talking about is a crossover round that we launched in March and closed in early June, $170 million crossover, a very exciting technology. It was an interesting tidbit that came from that is, and I'm sure Caroline had this response from many investors. When we were speaking to investors, the concern was my portfolio companies. What I need to make sure my portfolio companies have the capital to get to the next value inflection point for the current set of investors. So there was a little bit of a standoffishness for just a short period of time, but that was point one. And then, you know, how are the companies in their portfolio actually going to execute on their clinical development plans, given everything that was going on in the hospital systems in the U.S. So there was a little bit of a pause when we did launch the crossover. We had the benefit of having a lead in place, which I think is absolutely crucial, and a very well-known lead. So the investors could feel comfortable that a lot of the diligence had already been done. But I'll be honest, I had a few investors who do both public and private investing, to your point, Doug, who said, hey, I'm starting to see cracks in the public markets, and I sort of want to hold back. I don't know if now's a good time to be doing a crossover. That being said, those who I think had an understanding of the science and saw the real opportunity here, because it came, I think, at a very attractive valuation, lined up. And I think over the course of 3 weeks, we did close to 20 management and investor meetings, and we were able to close it in early June. So I think having a lead in place, spreading out the number of investors who were looking at the deal and who sort of had access to the deal, that's something I think what at Locust Walk we pride ourselves in, is not just bringing a few crossover investors to the table, but a wide range of investors across not only the venture world and the public world, but geographically diverse, so that we're able to create that that demand that made it a very, very oversubscribed crossover. And what I'd add is by the time we closed the deal, the market had changed. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the factors that drove that, but I wasn't hearing from investors about their portfolio companies. They'd addressed that. They'd come to terms, and whatever capital was needed or whatever needed to be happen on the clinical side had been adjusted. And my sense, and I'd be curious if Corey thinks the same way, but I felt like the venture world investors were sort of looking at the world the same way as they used to after a pretty short period of time.
Corey, that's a good lead in for you.
Well, it's been interesting to watch this. I mean, the first thing, as it was starting to, as the pandemic was starting to come on, and I'm thinking now late January into early February, and you're also dealing, let's face it, with the craziness and unpredictability of a presidential election and a particular president and a bit of craziness. I remember we were doing, at that point, this is when we could still meet in person, we were doing a crossover round for what I'll call my baby, a company I personally co-founded called ALX Oncology. We planned to raise 75 million. We were oversubscribed. We sort of sucked it up at that point and we raised 105. And we did that. I wasn't thrilled about taking that much dilution because we didn't need it if we could go public. But between clearly the pandemic coming along and what was going on election-wise, who knew? So we raised 105 because that made us bulletproof. And that's an important point, that we knew we had enough money to do the next series of clinical trials we needed to do, regardless of what happened politically, what happened pandemic-wise. Now, then you get into March, and March was sort of a crazy moment. I mean, in my own fund, we were closing our third fund. We lost a few dollars, not much. We thought we were going to close for $399. We promised our investors it would be less than 400. We closed for $394. So we did lose a family office that just, I felt for them. They were hugely exposed. We all sort of took a breath for a few weeks and watched what happened. And then, and we weren't sure. Had this panel been going on in the second, third, fourth week of March, and had you asked me, what's the venture world going to be like? What's the IPO world going to be like? What's going to happen in the coming months? I would have said, I don't have a clue. Do you? And then suddenly we got remarkably back to normal very quickly in April. And here we were as a venture group. There's 6 of us. We're fairly small, single office. And instead of meeting, we know each other really well. Suddenly, we're all living in our separate places and it became life by Zoom. And I have to say, our deal flow has been as high as ever. I mean, there've been a few adjustments. We've been doing lots of investments. We've had 3 of our companies do IPOs in the past, 4 or 5 weeks. ALX, Checkmate, and Harmony just yesterday. And we've just adjusted to the new world. And the new world of trying to learn how to meet people and how to do diligence without ever actually being with them in person and all those issues. But we've been doing crossover rounds, new investments, Series A, Series B. I see someone asked we can come to later on how, are you still looking at new chemical entities? We're looking, it is, as a venture group, we are looking as if nothing is different other than we don't meet in person. And I think I get a sense from a lot of my other funds that we deal with and syndicate with that they're very much the same. It doesn't mean there aren't small changes that have taken place and things we're thinking about, but from March to now, it happened very quickly that life got back to normal for us in April.
Good. Caroline, as far as your employees and running your business, you've got research you've got to be doing, right? And maybe even engineering and all that other great stuff. Is that working well for you?
Yeah, so we had emergency worker exemption. I mean, we were actually in a fortunate situation. Fortunate, depending how you think about it. In early January, we were manufacturing clinical supplies 250 miles from Wuhan. And so right as the pandemic was occurring in China and really starting, we had a bird's eye view of it. And it was very clear to me as we saw what was happening in China and as we were working with our supplier in China, that this was not business as usual. I mean, this was not something that was going to be contained to China. I had been responsible for emergency response for the BMS R&D organization when I had been there. And so I had very extensive experience in sort of dealing with these issues. And I realized right off the bat that this was something that Glimpse needed to plan for. So we actually started planning in January for, a assumed shutdown of our organization for in-person working at some point in the year in the US. So we did two things. We took care of our clinical supply chain, which was in the US and in China. We kept all of that on track. That was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was then we just put in a series of planning scenarios for our organization's operations. And we started about mid-February to socialize that with our entire organization, and kind of the idea that we were likely to shut down, how that was going to look. And then right before what was on the East Coast, the Biogen outbreak, we shut down. We went to, we had all non-essential workers go to, work from home. We moved the lab to a sort of a shift working structure with core priority programs only in place, and we operated we then got the emergency exemption when Massachusetts state put that in place, and we operated pretty much as every biotech company did over the course of the pandemic. We kept every single program on track. We fortunately had no one on our team become sick, and no family members become sick. So we came through it very well, and now we've got back largely to normal operation. But we've allowed non-essential, we have a computing team, we have a development team who don't need to be in the office, and we've currently given them the option to work from home, and I would say most of them still largely work at home. And so we largely adopted a pretty good work from home kind of structure, much as Corey indicated. I mean, I think we found that we don't need to be in the office, and people candidly don't really want to be in the office right now. And so, the lab team, they need to be, they want to be, and we're letting them, of course they need to do that. But aside from that, people aren't going in very much. Good.
So let's talk a little bit about the actual Zoom meetings and stuff. I was looking at some of the stuff in the DNC, Democratic National Convention, and the quality of the work that some of those people have, and the staging that they've done. I can see that happening now with some of the videos that we're doing for pitches, which would be interesting. But Corey, you've seen it. I'm sure Neil, you've seen it. But it is pretty. It's a new kind of dynamic. You don't get to visit and see the people in person as much, and you can't read them as much, and the people in the room. But there is an opportunity as a CEO, if you've got good lighting and a good internet connection, and you bring your team in to actually have something that's all written in front of you, so that you can present and show the enthusiasm of what you've got, and really kind of make a splash at it. But I'd love to hear some of the things that you guys have seen, and how that makes a difference at all for you.
Yeah, maybe I could take the extreme case of, it was interesting to see how an IPO works, and that's kind of an extreme fundraise. I was once the CEO of a company and took it public back in the 2000s, and I remember, just the flying all over the world and the logistics, even if you're in Manhattan, of trying to get from one meeting to another, and taxis, and you're late, and jet lag and all this. So ALX Oncology. First, we did test the waters. I'm executive chair there, and we're a very close team. Probably did 70, 80 meetings. It was the smoothest test the waters I had ever seen. In fact, I have to say, I'll give you the conclusion first. I don't think we're going back to the way it used to be. In person, yes, it's important, but between the test the waters and then the roadshow itself, my team saw over 100 meetings, and they could sleep at home in their own bed, have a glass of wine with their partner, significant other, whatever, that evening. They were the most relaxed. It was probably the best set of presentations I've seen. It worked really well. It got, 17, 18-fold oversubscribed. So the proof is there. I think it was a 95% success rate on the presentations to who wanted in. And it was so much more relaxed, and actually, I found it a lot better than the classic roadshow of flying all over the place. And so, I would speak to the benefits. You could say, is there any negative at all? The negative is we're all coping with that you don't get those moments, those little side conversation moments, the brief one-on-one moments, or the chance to get to see somebody's, perhaps their body language a little bit clearer. But I think we're learning how to adjust. Now, I gave you that as the extreme of an IPO roadshow and test the waters. But I've been watching people coming in, I without, giving up names of who we might be about to invest in, or who we just have, where there haven't been press releases or whatever. It's gone incredibly smoothly, having people pitch us, doing one-on-one conversations by Zoom, group meeting conversations. I found that we've actually all adapted. We're a smart species, and we've adapted, I think, quite well. I still miss the occasional, having a drink or coffee or something, of getting to know somebody a little bit deeper and better. But we're making investments based on meeting people only by Zoom so far. And if you had asked me how comfortable, if you had asked me in March, Corey, how comfortable are you going to be doing that? I would have said, Doug, I'm skeptical. Now you're asking me in, mid to late August, and I'm saying it actually works.
That's great.
It's interesting, Doug. In fact, I spoke to some investors back in March who said, we're not sure when we're going to invest next, because we don't know when we'll actually be able to have that face-to-face meeting. And look, I think everyone now has realized they can't put their business on hold. And I think there's been, I agree with Corey, it's worked pretty well. I do think that face-to-face meeting will come back someday, because I do think that interaction is important. But I think people have been able to figure out technology. I have an example of a call I did where we had people from all over the world, literally from Asia to the UK, and you do run into some issues with technology there. And so on the flip side, you're only as good as the worst part of the network, and sometimes the worst part of the network is right when someone's speaking. So that will all improve. That doesn't happen in face-to-face meetings. But I do think overall, if you were to ask people back in March versus now, would we be in a position where you could have such effective meetings online? It's been incredible. And I think the more stepping outside of our industry, the more that money is put into technology to make it even more seamless for everyone, it's only going to cement, in my opinion, Corey's conclusion that we're going to be doing most of this virtually going forward anyway. I do think one of the other things to think about is the logistics have changed. So now we're trying to make sure we factor in when we have a company that we're working with and maybe doing a series of meetings to work in a bio break here and there and a little bit of a break, because it's that little meeting time or time between meetings that used to take place was actually a really good opportunity for the management team to talk about, hey, what just happened at that meeting? How should we address it? Was there something new? And that's not necessarily happening like it used to. And it's not just because the meetings are right on top of each other, but there's also this, you turn off your video and you're at your home or you're by yourself and you don't have that spontaneous meeting. So we're trying to build in a little bit of time between virtual meetings so that there can be that internal back and forth, because that's an incredibly important part of the process from the company's standpoint.
yeah, you do have to provide that time in between, because you also want to get the feedback about how that meeting was held. You know, I've got clients that just sit there all day and do 15 meetings back to back, and it's like being at JP Morgan. It's all a blur at the end of the day, and you have no idea who you met, really. So, and who you talked to. So that's important. Another thing that I've kind of heard out there is, you know, one of the things that's missing that a lot of people do is they're looking at the dynamics of maybe the 2 or 3 people that are there, if it's a face-to-face meeting, and how they interact with each other. And maybe one person doesn't talk, but there is some faces you can be, you know, listening to and reading. And so I've seen a pile of pitches where clients have gone on and they brought their team, and it's been a great, you know, it was a great pitch, but it was just the CEO talking with these 3 other faces there, and there was very little interaction. And it felt really dry, even though he was very dynamic. So just as a tip, if you're going to bring other people onto the meeting, don't just wait for the Q&A with them. Get them involved in the pitch and the deck, and show the dynamics of your team there, because that's something that we are missing with this for sure.
Yeah, if I can just add oh, sorry, go ahead, Corey. No, I think that Neil and Doug, those are both really good points. So something that we did, you know, we had this kind of overnight, you know, switch, and something that we became, and then a whole new set of investors into the mix too. And we became super attentive to these things. We already had a team presentation dynamic, but we became super attentive to, you know, much more dynamically adjusting our materials, trying to understand what the investors might want to understand or not understand, and trying to create that feedback loop. Because as you're saying, there were sort of these back-to-back meetings, there was not feedback, there was not kind of the engagement that was existing before, and to make the discussions much more interactive, because there's this risk that it's just didactic, right? It's just one person, everyone sits there, they just like, okay, it's another presentation. And so we very consciously changed our presentation style and approach and engagement approach with the investors, but also kind of our surround sound, if you want, kind of engagement with the investor to try and understand what was important to them, what was going on in their world, and what may or may not help our presentation. And so while we, I think, did a good job researching investors before and making sure that our presentations were fine-tuned, we were even more attentive to that afterwards, because there just wasn't the pacing was different, the engagement approach was different, and we found that helped us. And I think it was a good learning. I mean, I think it points to just the subtle difference in the process that occurs when you're presenting virtually.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm going to give away a secret here. And 91 participants are going to know how to pull the wool over my eyes. So I remember some years ago in a face-to-face meeting, a group came in, and I'll do a good job so no one knows who this group is, pitching us a company. And as one of my partners, I like to have a whole group of people there. And as one of my partners was asking the CEO a key question about CMC issues, and the CEO was very smugly saying, "Oh yes, yes, no problem. We got, you know, we got this covered. It's gonna." I can't even remember. I spent my time not looking at the CEO. I was looking at the main technology guy, who was 3 or 4 people down the row, and his face. If you look at people's micro expressions, his face was embarrassment, humiliation. All you had to do was read that guy's face for a moment, and you knew you were hearing complete bullshit, and it was a lie. And when we walked out of the room, I remember saying to my partner, "Well, that guy just fed you a bunch of," I'll keep myself clean here. And he said, "How'd you know?" And I said, "Because I was watching the CSO." Now, when we did, so you read people's faces, and it's really, you learn a lot about people. What you have to adjust to, if you're on my end of this on Zoom, is not just to look at the person who's talking. I want the entire team on Zoom. I don't want them to stop video. I want to see everybody. And I'm looking at people's faces while the other ones are talking, because they don't realize how much they're showing about whether you're trying to get a sense of truth and where and what's really going on here. And you're just trying to pick up cues. So I like to have a whole group of people on Zoom and to watch the ones who aren't talking. There,
Yeah.
now I've given it away. Now everyone's going to be stone-faced when they're, when.
Corey,
But
we went down to 89 participants, so maybe 2 of them went away to use that. They're going to go use that intel
That's
right
it.
now.
That's it. But
That's
it is
right.
what you're losing, and
Oh, Corey, you went mute.
talking to someone on the way out or the way in, or just having that drink. There are times you learn things about people, what they're thinking, their worries, their confidence, in various ways that aren't just the words coming out of their mouth. And that's what we're trying to learn, how to pick up that kind of interaction. What's the confidence you're going to have in that person as CEO or whatever role, and we're trying to learn to adapt. And how do you learn that about people when you're interacting with them by Zoom and not in those face-to-face settings? And I think we're getting better at it. We'll probably learn. We'll probably have this session in a year, and we'll all be talking about some of the mistakes we made, where we didn't have some of the cues that we're used to getting about people.
Yeah, yeah. So we actually had the results of the poll came through, and just to show, so the questions we asked was, are you currently seeking funding for your organization? And of the 100 people on board, 67% said yes, and the rest said no. Have you closed a private round in the last 5 months? And 22% said yes, which is interesting. And how have you been finding virtual funding raising? And 9% said easier, 4% said harder, and 46% said the same. I don't know where the other percent went, but we can just say it's the number of people. Actually, I'm sorry, it was 45% harder, 9% easier, 45% harder, 48% the same. So that's interesting. You, Neil, did some work with Asia. Now, a lot of the times doing deals in Asia was done virtually as well before the COVID, right? In a lot of respects, so not a big change there. Has there been any big adjustment or change in those markets?
No, I think, Doug, that the virtual, probably more conference calls back in the day, if we want to call pre-COVID back in the day. But I think now everyone's, settled on Zoom and Teams, and so that interaction takes place. I think the issue with Asia is it's an opportunity, but it's also a risk, right? And with what's going on with the trade war, we're talking to companies that are talking to both investors and companies, and sort of in the middle there. And there are investors that are really worried about where we're going from a trade war perspective, and they're worried about their LPs, many of whom come from Asia, and their ability to get capital into the funds. And so I think if you look at one of the questions that we were talking about before this session was all the money that's become available for biotech. And you could argue that wealth creation in Asia over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of participation from Asia, maybe less so in the last year or so because of some of the trade wars, but they've gotten involved not only with capital, but also trying to get their hands on assets and clinical programs that they can run in Asia and then get rights to sell in Asia. And that's actually become a really interesting opportunity for companies in the US in particular, where you can get some non-dilutive financing via some type of joint venture. And there is a lot of creative ways to go about doing that. But I think, as I started with these comments, just even in the last month or two, there's been a lot more concern about the trade war and what's happening there. And I feel like the Asia-based investors are really trying to figure out how they're going to navigate the political waters. And on the flip side of that, for the companies, they're also trying to navigate when they've got a commitment from an Asia-based investor, is there a CFIUS or an ODI issue that may cause that commitment to be at risk? So there's just a lot of issues at play, and there's a lot of Asia-based investors who are looking at November very, very closely, thinking that will be potentially, depending on how the election goes, an opportunity for things to settle. I'm not so sure that's the case, but I know that is the angle that many Asia-based investors are looking at.
Good. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in, but beforehand, I just wanted to point out one other kind of little trick that's been valuable for people. You know, it's like JP. Think of these as almost like JP Morgan, where you got a half an hour or you set up an hour or a half hour for the pitch. And you do want to spend a couple minutes getting to know the person. So, you know, a little side chatting about where you are and what part of the world you're in and your farm that you're on or things like that are always valuable, because those are usually the things I remember about people during JP Morgan meetings, is some of that stuff, because all the technologies become a blur in the company. And you know, we can't lose that. And so I think that's important. And the other thing I've been telling with companies that works really well. I told this to Lubor about 3 or 4 years ago, and now he does it with every meeting because we're good friends. And is after you've had your chit chat, ask the investor how he would like to use the time. That way you get an interaction and you're getting onto their time zone and what they want to do. And they could say, well, I've been through the deck real carefully. I'd like it. I'd really like to go into this right away. Or, you know, just give me the presentation and let's allow 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A or things like that. And I find that actually really opens up the conversation to people. And I don't know if, Corey, you like to do that with people as well, and whether that's valuable to you.
Oh, certainly. I mean, anything that's going to help to get you to know one another. We often start out, you know, when we first meet with groups, you know, but I'm not sure it's changed. We were doing it before. I mean, you know, you try to let them know as an investor, do you want them to start from the beginning? Who in your team knows, doesn't know, what detail, you know, or you just have a set of specific questions. I mean, just as a custom, we try to we try to do that at the beginning of any meeting to make best use of time.
But so here's a couple questions from the team, from the outside. There are 2 questions from Ernest Long. Do the panelists find people starting to record meetings, or do people prefer not to record in this virtual world?
I would prefer not to record. I'd rather not have recordings of me floating around. I'm going to be much more less free with my opinions about things if people are recording. So
I'll ask that on the other side.
I could just say I've not had. I mean, you're recording this, but that's for a purpose. We know this is a panel. I am unaware that in any meeting with a company pitching to me that we or they have recorded in the past many months, not a single one.
Has anybody sent you a recording of them pitching?
Has anyone ever what?
Just sent you a video of them pitching or pre-recorded?
No, the only ones I see that for are the IPOs.
Okay,
the IPOs,
right.
I mean, you know, that's the rules these days. You know, when you're that Monday morning, your S1 becomes public, your final version, and so does a video of your presentation, so everybody can see it.
Yeah. And the other question is it better to have one person do the whole presentation, or have 2 to 3 people do different parts, thereby engaging the whole team? I think that's pretty obvious, but if anybody has any other thoughts. You're betting on the team, not just the CEO, right?
You bet. You want to see a few people really being involved.
So actually we talked about, yeah, go ahead, Neil.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, if it's one person, I think as an investor, you're probably looking at it and saying, what's behind that one person? You don't want to have one person being the firm. Certainly the CEO plays that role, but I think it's important to show the depth of the management team, the leadership, And really when it comes down to it, the science. And so to the extent that you can include the right people, it helps the conversation flow, and it shows that you've built a real company around the asset, if you will.
Yeah, and you don't have the excuse that you didn't want to fly them out, or they couldn't take the time to come out, or things like that either. You don't have that either anymore.
That's right.
So one other question, it doesn't have the name of the person, but the question was crossover versus SPACs. Could you guys discuss a little bit? We just chatted about that in the pre-conference.
There are certain contexts where SPACs might work, but you know, and they're getting popular at this moment, and all the bankers are pitching us that VenBio should have a SPAC with us, or you know, et cetera, et cetera. If you can do, if your company is strong and you have the time to do a traditional crossover and then to go public, I would still go down that route. And you know, 3 of our portfolio companies went public this summer. The normal way, we didn't use SPACs. SPACs will have their place. I mean, you know, we talk about it as a firm. There may be 1 or 2 companies of ours that are in very interesting positions where perhaps they could just go into a SPAC. I mean, it's a SPAC being almost not so different than a reverse merger into a public shell. I mean, fulfilling the same sort of role where it might save time and save dilution. So it's hard to give a general answer, but since we were asked a general question, I would still face the traditional crossover to IPO route unless I had a special situation that really fit the SPAC model.
I would definitely agree with that. You certainly don't want to do a crossover than a SPAC. You know, that the SPAC is essentially takes the place of that. It's the crossover to IPO all in one. To Corey's point, it is very circumstantial. I mean, I think it certainly is good for the investors in the SPAC because they get an opportunity to pass on the company. Certainly for the sponsor who gets equity in the SPAC. For the right company, it may be the right answer at the right time. And that, you know, I think we could say that a SPAC was a 4-letter word, you know, 6 to 12 months ago. And now it is, you know, in vogue. And I think there's real companies that are going the SPAC route. But if you were to ask me, the company going through its development and positioning itself for the public markets, there's no better way to do it than a crossover because of bringing in the investors who can support the company. You get higher valuations, you get better post-IPO performance. I just think that crossover is still the one to beat.
And Neil, I'll just be slightly cynical about that. I mean, I agree with everything you're saying, but I'll be slightly cynical in the following way. Everybody right now is wondering, how long is this remarkable open window for IPOs going to last? How robust is it? And there's always the worry if companies start to go out that have nothing and no news flow, whether that's going to crash. You know, we've seen this historically at different times. What crashes an open window? And with the election coming up and people wondering, can I get out? The reason SPACs have become so damn popular in the last few months is because suddenly people are looking at timelines and saying, my God, to do a crossover and then get a news flow and do my test and am I going to have to go public in January, and will there be markets? So SPACs at this moment in time, suddenly for some people think temporally, maybe I can get out quicker. It's a very timing specific thing. And I agree with you, 6, 9, 12 months ago, bankers were not pitching me on SPACs. Now it's all this rush because nobody knows what November 3rd is going to bring us.
Yep. So for those people that don't know, SPACs are special acquisition corps, which are actually created to go off and find with a public shell and cash to go off and find a cool technology to bring in and acquire and be public. And there's been some successful ones, but it's still, I guess, the answer of whether these things are any good or not on the long run is not been proven. Right? Yeah. So we've got only about 5 minutes left. So I'd like to chat with each of you guys and have you guys kind of wrap up a little bit with telling me about what are the things that you are really excited about in the next year or so, and also what is keeping you up at night from maybe a macro perspective or micro, if you would like, for your organization and the future of our industry. Caroline, do you want to start, or do you want to pass that on to someone while you think about it?
No, I can take that. So what are we excited about? We're, we raised our Series B because we're entering into late phase clinical development. And, that means we've gone through a huge amount of de-risking, and what's left for us now are pivotal efficacy studies. And so it's an incredible moment for us, and we're about to initiate those studies in NASH, and we'll also have our first in human in oncology. And so for us, it's an incredibly exciting moment, and we don't see right now we don't see any significant delays from COVID as a result of that. So we're very fortunate, and also we're very, very excited. So from our point of view, for our technology, it's great, and we also see a lot of opportunity for technology in the infectious disease arena as well. And we're looking at that very carefully. We want to make sure that there's a sort of a unique value proposition and positioning. So there's a lot that's very exciting for us. That said, the macro, we did overraise for good reason, for all the reasons that were discussed earlier, right? To kind of, I think Corey said it well, right? To bulletproof against the kind of the macroeconomic climate and things that we can't predict right now. And we have an election coming. We have the fall, and the prospect of a COVID resurgence as well as the flu. And I think those are things that are going to create a lot of unpredictability for us in how we execute our plans, but also from a broader public health perspective. And so there's that instability that I think we can contemplate and plan against, but it's also something that we're going to be very careful about.
Yep. Neil?
So I would say what I'm worried about is what we talked a little bit about before we started. We're in a great fundraising environment, right? And I've been doing this a long time, and I know it's going to end. So am I worried about that? A little bit, but on the flip side of that, we built a great team here in capital markets, and we have the ability to help companies raise capital through the cycle. If the public markets suddenly pull back, there's still going to be private capital raising earlier. There's a lot of companies that have gone out. To be honest, I think maybe earlier than they should have. We're going to need capital as a public company, and there's going to be a great opportunity to do a lot of pipes for really good companies that maybe just didn't get enough capital to get to the right spot for them from a valuation perspective, but it'll make it a very interesting opportunity for investors. So I just love how we're kind of set up here to do everything from A through crossover and IPO advisory, and a great team to work with here at Locust Walk. The one thing I just want to leave for the companies on the line, I think one of the threads through everything we've talked about here is making that connection with the investors. And one of the things to do is develop a relationship with the investors. It's hard to do on that one Zoom call, but reach out to them separately. Try to get connected along the way, because that I think is going to be a really important part of separating yourself from what is likely to be a lot of companies out in the market in the fall. So that would be my one bit of advice. Take that extra step to try to develop a relationship.
Good. Corey, I know you've got some great ideas and visions. Sure. And stories.
My advice to folks would be, the reality. We're going to be in a recession. We are in a recession. Ignore it for the moment, IPOs, ignore the stock market. I mean, that doesn't reflect the way our society is hurting in terms of unemployment and small businesses going belly up. And I say that because this is a time, if you raise money, don't get hung up on dilution, raise enough. And we're looking at things to make sure people, and you've heard Carolyn say it, you've heard me say it on deals we've been involved with. Make sure it's a strong syndicate. The money will be tranched, but make sure there's enough money there to get to the real value creating milestones and to get through the next few years. And we're very conscious of that. And I think, Doug, you said at the beginning that actually deals are pretty large right now. I think investors are trying to make sure that there are enough investors with deep pockets, enough money around the table, that the company is not going to run out of money. And I would just say that that one doesn't know what's going to happen in the next year or so, and I would just be prudent and raise enough. In terms of what areas, we're looking at everything. There's so much exciting technology. We have so many healthcare needs, and there's so many things coming along. It's really hard to narrow them down, other than to say I've never seen so many exciting possibilities for solving disease, for turning science, great science, into impactful medicine. And we just all have to be wise about how we do it.
Yeah. So my thoughts are, I'm really excited. In probably the last 4 or 5 years, we've been watching understanding of biology, chemistry, and new technologies coming along that have really kind of taken this industry to a whole new level. It's almost a logarithmic growth of new information that we know, and new ways to tackle disease, which I'm real excited about, and that keeps me going every time. I wake up every day and get excited. But yeah, Corey, I'm a real believer too that the markets are not set where they should be, and we need to be prepared for maybe some tougher times coming in. But I think these companies are going to have a lot of money, and they've been through this before. We've been through long dry patches of droughts of capital in this industry before, and we've managed to come out on the other side as a bigger, better industry. So the ups and downs of this industry are very predictable now, and we just need to be prepared for it. So with that, I really want to thank the panelists for being part of this. We can't applaud you like everybody else does, but I really appreciate you taking the time to be part of this. And feel free to go over to Crush Life Sciences website and take a look at some of the other programs we've done in the past. We have not put up the programs moving forward for the virtual programs, but those will be arriving pretty soon. But thank you again, everybody, for joining. We'll sign off. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.